Tonight, we mark the loss but celebrate the life of actor Philip Seymour Hoffman. He died in his Manhattan apartment Sunday morning. He was 46 years old. The suspected cause is a drug overdose. In a 25-year career, he appeared in more than 50 films. Hoffman captivated audiences with his talent and his versatility. He was unafraid to inhabit and humanize even the most unsympathetic of characters. He was nominated for 4 Academy Awards. He won the Oscar for Best Actor for his role as Truman Capote in the 2005 film Capote. He received 3 Tony nominations, most recently in 2012 for his role as Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman. Joining me now to talk about Philip Seymour Hoffman, 2 film critics who know his work very well. David Denby of the New Yorker magazine and A.O. Tony Scott of the New York Times. I am pleased to have them here at this table. So I begin by asking you just to think out loud about Philip Seymour.
Well, you know, when I heard the news yesterday, it came as a real shock. Obviously, him being as young as he was, and very much it seemed in his prime, having just recently in The Master on screen and in Death of a Salesman on stage delivered 2 just extraordinary performances. And I felt much more personally affected by this than by many celebrity passings. And I didn't know him at all. I never met him. But he and I are about the same age, and I felt like my education as a moviegoer and then as a film critic was in a way linked with his career. The movies that mattered to me in the late 90s, some of the independent movies in that kind of great flowering of American independent cinema, Boogie Nights, Todd Solondz's Happiness. Yeah. He was in those, and he was really indelible and memorable in those. And then he was both a wonderful character actor, and he had great character parts in big Hollywood movies, but partly because of the flowering of that independent and studio specialty division cinema, and the ambitions of directors like Paul Thomas Anderson and others, he was able to become a star, to take on these lead roles that were incredibly ambitious, often very dark and troubling. And there was just this kind of honesty, I guess, in his work that was very unusual and will be very much missed.
Which, not a romantic actor or physically heroic actor, but spiritually heroic. And I mean, he would start from the outside and work in, and maybe you would say that about many good actors. But I was feeling he was just opening up all kinds of fears, rages, lusts, everything it never stayed on the surface, Charlie. It always went deep. Even in small roles, I mean, he could suggest an infinitude of soulfulness, you know, underneath whatever he was doing on the surface, and the surface was spectacular. I mean, you remember Truman Capote. It was an impersonation, but he also got a complete understanding of what a particular kind of person was. I mean, he could play baseball manager, Art Howe in Moneyball. Remember, he just has with his gut sticking out, he got that.
You could almost feel the
elderly manager with a big beer gut. You know,
and he never played. I mean, you said, and I think it's right, that he made these very unpleasant characters sympathetic. You know, whether we're talking about the guy in Charlie Kaufman's Synecdoche, New York, excuse me,
That's right.
or the sexual predator in Todd Solondz's Happiness. But he never made an overt play for the audience's sympathy. He was never about being likable. The task was to be completely this person who you're playing, to go as deep as you could possibly go, and that honesty is what will bring the audience to your point of view and make them not necessarily sympathize but understand and believe what you're doing. And there's enormous credibility in the way that he
wrote about this. What did he do in The Master?
Well, The Master is just, I mean, I think it's an amazing movie. It's a movie that I'll need to watch many more times to fully absorb. It's an extremely complicated and layered movie about 2 very complicated characters, Freddie Quell, played by Joaquin Phoenix, and Lancaster Dodd, who is a showman, who in a way, Hoffman is playing an actor, a guy who presents himself to the world as this confident salesman and faith healer and guru and huckster and whatever else he is. And he plays that perfectly with all of the exuberance and verve that this guy would have. But he also lets you see the loneliness and the pain and the confusion, and the spiritual hunger and the need to be loved that drives this guy. And he does it. I can't say, I couldn't anatomize what the craft is that gets him there. He's just, sometimes it's even just the color of his face, the way he kind of would, flush pink and laugh or burst into song. But it's an amazing and somewhat unusually for him, very exuberant and robust and kind of rambunctious and showy performance. But there's always the inner man there, the soul in torment.
He could take a close-up in that movie and in Capote. Remember these enormous close-ups, better than anybody. I mean, it's a very dangerous thing for a director and an actor to stay in close and hold it minute after minute, so you would watch the play on his face. And of course the voice was remarkable, and he was a master of tempo, Chile. I think that was it. He would really slow things down at times. There are scenes in The Master where he just, there's pauses, and Capote too, it's all very measured and everything, without any boredom. I mean, you still want to fill in all of those spaces because he's doing so much. I mean, you don't have to fill in spaces because he's doing so much physically with his face in close-up. I mean, that voice gets into your soul. And he must have been incredibly intelligent, and just to be egocentric for a second, I would have the feeling that he would look at you and he could understand you and play you. He has played people like the two nerds here, and very successful. Remember The Savages, where he's kind of... The Savage is very good with Laura Linney, where he's a university intellectual who's frustrated and bitter and plays Brecht viol on the way to work every day just to make sure he's frustrated and bitter. I mean,
to keep his misanthropy tuned to the
perfect pitch.
Exactly.
Yes.
And yet at the same time he could play with great skill in Mission Impossible, in big blockbuster type built movies.
Yeah, and he could be. I mean, in the movie in Charlie Wilson's War, the Mike Nichols movie,
he was fast.
He was fast. He playing this kind of slightly unhinged CIA operative who keeps going into John Slattery's office and breaking the window with a hammer and swearing a blue streak. But there too, it's like he's talking Aaron Sorkin dialogue, but he's doing it as if this guy is just inventing it out of
he really took on Tom Hanks in that movie, and that sort of kept him off balance.
Tom Hanks played Charles Wilson.
As he did with Meryl Streep in Doubt. I mean, that's exactly if you talk about sort of a battle of technique and of
and
great
Doubt,
actors.
it's really complex and interesting because the priest who may be a predator is also a genuinely benevolent guy who takes care of the weaker students in this parish school. So and the whole point is to hold you without, in that ambivalence without really knowing for sure. I mean, Meryl Streep knows for sure, but we don't know for sure.
Right. And looking at him and watching him in every scene, you can go one way and the other way, and you keep. It keeps you in that state of suspension.
I don't want to read too much into this, but then someone who knew him said, look, you can't do what he did by getting so deep into the characters he played without paying a price. Yeah. The mental effort that required, and the craft.
This was said about jazz musicians also 60 years ago, that they were out there exposing their soul as well as their craft. But you can name jazz musicians who lived to 80.
Exactly
and Robert De Niro and Al Pacino are still active in their 70s, and of course people die in the street all the time of heroin overdoses. So I just don't know how to read this. I mean, it's just despairing in a way.
It is. I mean, I think there is something to that, in that at least there is a risk when you're going to these regions of psychic darkness and difficulty. Well, it has to hurt, and you may need to try to make it not hurt.
I think the point here is that if you do it as well as he did it, to get as close and as raw as he did, then you're really
takes a lot out of you.
It takes something out of you. Yeah.
I think he would have continued, though, and I think he would have sort of triple-tracked his career. He would have been in an occasional big-budget movie. He would have done these independent films, and don't forget he could get them made.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yes,
That was
indeed. And you know,
and the theater.
And the theater. I mean, he did seem to be kind of working through some of the most demanding kind of central roles of
Willie Loman.
Willie Loman
He was in
and
Long Day's Journey.
True West and Long Day's Journey.
And in fact, he might have come back and played Tyrone.
Yeah.
So he played
exactly.
the younger one.
John
So he would have come
Younger one,
back and
yes.
played the older one.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's endless. I mean, I have 4 pages of credits here for, I mean, a man who was 46. I mean,
50 films. And
he worked all the time and he was part of a theater company and was inspiring young playwrights to work and write, you know, for him and for other people. I mean, you can't explain this kind of genius. I mean, it comes along once in a generation and it leaves a big hole.
A big hole, and it's only, you know, when just in the last 24 hours or so that you begin to realize how big the hole was. I mean, because you just figure a guy like that working so much is going to be around, is going to be in 4 or 5 movies a year, is going to be on the stage, you know, forever, and then you realize how much he's accomplished and how special he was. There really, I don't think, was anyone who quite had that combination of intelligence and raw talent, including, as you say, a kind of talent and control of his physical bearing and his face, and the ambition and discipline.
But then we talk about these dark roles. He also had comedic skills.
Oh yeah.
Boogie Nights.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Boogie Nights is both. The scene that people remember in Boogie Nights is one of the most heartbreaking of him, you know, weeping in the car after Mark Wahlberg has rebuffed his advances. But even in really, you know, a bad movie like Along Came Polly, which was a romantic comedy with Ben Stiller and Jennifer Aniston, a movie that no one should ever see, but you should go onto YouTube and see the scenes where Philip Seymour Hoffman, playing kind of the wacky best friend of Ben Stiller, is hilarious, trying to kind of, you know, school him in how to be a player and how to get the ladies.
Years ago, he was in The Talented Mr. Ripley as Freddie, the Princeton bum, who is a hedonist, a drinker, a fornicator. I mean, and you don't imagine him playing that kind of role, but he's actually very funny in it. I mean, and he's on to Matt Damon's imposture from the beginning, as I remember. Yeah, so he had a kind of premature gut, but it didn't matter. I mean, in fact, it never mattered. I mean, you think of the appearance, what they all look like now. I mean, what he looked like.
Whenever I would see him, and he was here many times, I have the opportunity to talk to people as well as enjoy their work. And I mean, there was also a certain kind of rumpleness about him. This was not a guy who didn't come in. His hair was never perfect, and he had a kind of rumpled. His tie was often open if he had a tie. Sometimes a beard. I mean, there was a sense.
Didn't care.
Didn't care. Did not.
And he could use that rumpledness.
Yeah, indeed.
And many actors could not. I mean, so.
And then he could also bring it. You know, he was so perfect and fastidious as Truman Capote. And in another, you know, great role, you could keep remembering them in The Big Lebowski, playing the kind of
one of my favorites.
the nervous assistant of the Big Lebowski himself.
When you think best, is there one moment, one scene, one role, Tony, that
it's hard.
It came to mind when you
hard to pick it out. I
thought about this guy?
I thought of him talking on the phone and falling apart in Happiness. I mean, Happiness is such a profoundly unpleasant movie in a way, and how deep he goes into the unhappiness of that character is still something that that haunts me. I think of that, and I also think of him, among others, in the 25th Hour, in a Spike Lee movie, where he's playing one of the friends of the main character, who's a school teacher who's got, you know, a terrible, tormenting, inappropriate crush on one of his young students, and that's another, you know, he's playing another nerd, and I don't know what it is. Those are small moments in those films, and I probably haven't, you know, seen those films in 10 or 15 years, but there they are, and there he is. You know.
What's remarkable in Capote is that his Truman is a master of his social scene, his atmosphere, and also, but there's a suggestion with him of deep hurt. Mm-hmm. And when he meets this Perry Smith, one of the killers who killed the Clutters, right, from In Cold Blood, he recognizes someone who's a fellow sufferer, and there's a bond between them, and Hoffman lets you see that without...
And he feels it when they kill him.
Yes, but without losing his sense of his own specialness and his distance from this working class, psychopath.
And his own ambition.
And his own ambition. And the way he will use that guy to get what...
It's probably the best portrait of a writer and all his, wiliness and intelligence.
You just also, in a moment like this, without knowing, there will be obviously an investigation, but it seems from what we've read so far and what's been reported so far, it may have been a heroin addiction and to be found, if it turns out to be true, in a room alone with a needle in it. It drives you crazy as to what happened. I mean, because of so much talent, a man who was poised to do all the great roles that theater had to offer, or any great director had to offer. Yeah. And you wake up one day and there's somebody saying, "Have you heard the news?" And you say, someone who had so much that he could do and had a remarkable ability to crawl inside someone else and have you understand what that person, who that person was.
I think also who was very much admired and loved by the people he worked with, by his peers, by the directors.
And someone came to me, one of my colleagues this morning, and said, "You got to see this." It was his Academy Award speech for Capote. And his mother was there, because his mother evidently had raised him, and she was there. And he thanked all the requisite people. But most of it, at the end, was about his mother. And he said, "We're here together," Amazing.
She showed him his first movies, I think, and took him to his first plays, and it was central to his life.
Well, thank you very much, David. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
We will now show you from the appearances on this program, Philip Seymour Hoffman talking about the craft that he loved and did so well, acting.